I want to look at a couple of passages that come out in the book of Acts this morning as we continue to talk about the church. And if you recall from about 2 weeks ago, I said that the best way to define the church is not a building, it's not a location, it's not even an organization, but to understand it as the people who are gathered together that are Christ's disciples, that represent Jesus Christ here in this world. The Christian church is unique because we are his representatives. We are his reflection, or as I said 2 weeks ago, we're the manifestation of the person of Christ in this world. And here's the thing. We can do a good job or we can do a bad job. And last week we talked about how the early church kind of reflected in a very positive and good way, in a way that was very attractive, in a way that was a very positive way to the world who Jesus Christ was, of what his character was like. And this morning I want to continue on talking not only about the church as in the organization or the reflection of Christ, but then how we as individual members of the church, how we can really help the name of Christ, the glory of God be lifted up. And so there's a passage, a couple of places that I want to look in the book of Acts. And I want to read one to you first off in Acts chapter 4. And I want to talk to you specifically about a man named Joseph who was also called Barnabas. And I want to give you a few insights from his life as he loved the church, as he served God, what we also can do that will make a definite impact upon the church and upon our families, maybe even our workplaces, within our schools, wherever we are involved with other people. So let me read a few verses to you from Acts chapter 4, beginning with verse 34 through verse 36. And so this is describing the early church, and here's what it says. There was not a needy person among them, for as many as were owners of lands or houses sold them and brought the proceeds of what was sold and laid it at the apostles' feet, and it was distributed to each as any had need. Thus Joseph, who was also called by the apostles Barnabas, which means the son of encouragement, a Levite, a native of Cyprus, sold a field that belonged to him and brought the money and laid it at the apostles' feet. If you guys know a little bit about Barnabas, what you find that the Bible talks about him is that not as some great orator or teacher or someone who made a huge impact on the church by missions or leadership, but really how he encouraged other leaders, how he encouraged church members, how he encouraged the church in general. And so it's something that maybe we can easily overlook because we don't ever find his prayers. We don't ever find his sermons. We don't ever find something that he did in terms of building up the church in what we usually consider leadership, but rather what we find is someone who kind of behind the scenes builds up the church, builds up relationships, and maybe you might want to call him one of those people that kind of bring the church together in community. He's kind of relational glue. He's one of those people that's absolutely essential for the church to be healthy, for any group, any community. Maybe you have a group of friends or some smaller organization or some workplace where you know and you can point out to a few people that make that organization run smoothly, that bring about a lot of good feelings, a lot of positive energy to that group, to that community. Well, Barnabas was one of those people. Now, what's interesting to me is that his name was Joseph, a pretty common name of the day. He was of the group, of the family, of the tribe of Levites. And so he kind of had this lineage of being in the priesthood kind of a thing. That was his family group. And then he was not a native of Jerusalem, but he was from another area called Cyprus. So he wasn't a local of Jerusalem, but somehow he was there living and serving. And he loved this early church. He loved the early church. He was passionate about the early church. And he wanted to do whatever he could, whatever gifting, whatever ability, whatever resources he had to take this early church, these disciples of Christ that gathered together, and serve them as fully as he could. It's very interesting to me because I think oftentimes we look at the church or any organization and we look at it, and even if we care a lot about it, we often sit around criticizing it. I mean, it's the reality. I remember when I first graduated from seminary, there was a bunch of my friends that went to seminary with me. We all kind of graduated at the same time, and we all started serving in the church full time around the same time. It was about 1995. And we'd get together on Mondays. A lot of us were still single at the time, and we have Mondays off. Pastors, usually it's kind of a traditional thing, but we get Mondays off because we work the weekends, right? And so we would get together on Mondays, and we would get together. Actually, a lot of us were still younger, and we used to play a lot of sports and stuff. So we'd get together at one of the churches in LA, and around like 9 or 10 in the morning, we'd play basketball for a couple hours. And then afterwards, because LA had a lot of restaurants and stuff, we'd go and eat lunch together at around noon, and a bunch of us would go, maybe 8, 9, or 10 of us, we would go, and then we would sit around talking about the church. And I still remember this, and I don't say it with any kind of pride or any kind of, whatever, but kind of, with a little bit of sense of guilt and shame, but we used to bash our senior pastors and our leadership, like what they were doing wrong, or we would bash the organizational system, how we had all the answers. And, we were all young guys still, and very idealistic. But looking back on it, what I realized is that, maybe we weren't, all encouraging and all those things, but maybe sometimes our mentality was kind of wrong, our attitude was wrong. Instead of looking about how can we serve our churches and how we can encourage one another to do better, we kind of sat around nitpicking and kind of saying, man, I would change this, I would do that, and basically criticizing the churches and the organizations that we were a part of, and in a sense, serving. I remember a few years after that, a lot of us, we were big into going to these leadership conferences and learning things. And I remember going to one leadership conference that I really was looking forward to. The church was more than happy to pay my way, so I flew out there and got the hotels, and a bunch of my friends had gone to. We came to this leadership conference, and we were looking forward to the keynote speaker, and he came up to speak. And I remember this because he just came up and he said, "Who among here is disappointed with your leadership at your church?" And he made us all raise our hand. And so some of us, a bunch of us were pastors, but a bunch of us were leaders in the business and other world. And so he was actually so well known that a lot of Christian businessmen also came to this. And so we all raised our hand. And that was kind of a funny thing. And he said, how many of you think, see these kind of issues? And how many, and so he kind of went through this thing where I felt like, oh man, he's going to bash the church. And then he said, but let me teach you how you can transform your churches, your workplaces, your families, your organizations, whatever places you have relationships. And he started out by showing all the negatives, and we were all agreeing. He's like, yeah, I see that, and I see this, and I see how leadership is bad this way. And after doing this, he said, in 5 minutes, the next 5 minutes, I want you to pull out your notes, and I'm going to show you how to transform your organizations. And then he said, you have the power, and you have a choice to make. And we're like, okay. And then from behind this podium, he pulled out 2 plastic buckets. Exact same identical buckets, 2 buckets. And then he turned them around. He said, every single one of you have these 2 buckets. Whenever an issue, a problem, a relational system, conflict, anything happens within your organization, within your church, you can imagine that as being a little spark or a little fire that happens within your family, within your organization, your workplace, or within the church. And all of us have these 2 buckets, and as he turned them around, one said water, and the other said gasoline. And he said, you have a choice of whether to help deal with that problem, help to resolve that problem, help to extinguish that fire, or by what you say and how you act, you can throw fuel onto it, gasoline onto it, and make it into a bigger problem, a bigger fire. I still remember that. I mean, it just really stayed with me. And at that time, I had a real deep sense of conviction that instead of complaining and whining about things that were falling short, or what the senior pastor, or what other leadership, or what the lay leadership, or what people weren't coming on time, or doing things that they said they were going to do, and all these relational issues and all these minor problems, instead of whining and complaining about that, I realized that I had the power to make a choice of whether to throw gasoline and fuel on the situation, or to put water and to try to resolve and deal with the fires and the problems that were occurring. Now, I'm not saying that by yourself and by just this ideology that you can transform any organization, but I'm saying that if enough people think in this way and begin to really take ownership of what the choices that they are making, you could radically transform. You can radically transform organizations, families, workplaces, and especially church. The church especially needs to have this be true. When I look at Barnabas, he was somebody that understood this and worked with it. And so I want to look at a few of his actions and his behaviors I think that we can all emulate, and especially within the church, but also at work, at our homes, at our schools, wherever. And we begin to apply these principles, I believe that you'll be someone who encourages whatever group, whatever organization you're a part of to be better, to be stronger, to be healthier. And especially should be true of the church. The first thing that I want to point out to you, kind of that's fundamental, that's foundational, that I think we kind of overlook, comes out in the book of Acts. Last week when we looked at Acts chapter 2, we found this very similar kind of thing. They were having everything in common. They were sharing. And then here it says that people literally were selling land and houses and using that proceeds for one another. Now, I want to be very careful here, because the Bible is not saying let's become a socialist, communist organization where nobody owns anything and we all put it into a common pool and everyone who has needs uses it. No, it says here very clearly that they would sell these houses and these lands and these possessions, because usually that was what that they had. What savings accounts they would have would be invested in lands or houses. They didn't have banks like what we have now. It would be in the form of possessions. They would liquidate some of these assets and they would bring it to the apostles, to the leaders of the church, and say, hey, we want to support the ministry. Whatever you need, use this to fulfill those goals, those things. And so it wasn't just this kind of general, everybody owns everybody else's stuff. I can use your stuff, you can use my stuff. It wasn't that kind of mentality, but it was, I have resources and the church has needs. Let me help fill those needs. But what's interesting is that there's a fundamental underlying principle that we have to understand about organizations, about communities, and especially about the church. And the principle that comes out here is something that I want you to grasp a hold of. What was going on when these people were selling lands and houses and giving the proceeds to the apostles and laying it at their feet as everyone had need was this. They were understanding the principle that people are always more important than resources. They're always more important than projects. They're always more important than material things. Now I know if you think about any business or your workplace or a company, ultimately the bottom line of all those places is what? Money. If your business does not make a profit, does not make money, that's the end of the business. But any good business knows that though that may be what's necessary and needed, the way for any business to thrive is by caring about its customers. And it should be true that they care about its workers and about one another. And what I find emulated, what I find laid out here is such a critical thing, because I think so many times without, we may agree with all of this, but without thinking about it, we end up putting resources, we end up putting projects, we end up putting timelines and deadlines before people. I'm not saying those are not important. I think all of those things are important. We should hold people accountable within the church, at work, within our families. But see, the goal for me when I'm raising my kids is not that they have a certain set of behaviors. It's not that they follow my rules. It's not that they keep their rooms clean and do their chores and put away their dishes. It's not that they're obedient and have good manners. It's that they become responsible, moral, good people. And the reason why I have all these rules and things for them to do is with the end goal that that's what they would become. See, sometimes as parents, sometimes as bosses, sometimes as Christians, we become somewhat legalistic and stuck on rules and laws and projects and tasks and deadlines because our ultimate goal is not developing the person, but accomplishing a task. And we have to understand that even in the workplace, that should never be the only goal. And especially within the church, the ultimate goal is to build up people, to become mature, to grow. When we take people to task and say, hey, you need to do this, you need to be responsible, you need to keep this timeline, we need to hold you accountable to these things, it's not because of my sense of legalism or my sense of perfectionism or I can't stand things not getting done, but it's got to be ultimately, whatever personality type that you have, for the benefit and the good of that person. The church, when it disciplines people, though the church nowadays doesn't really do it very much, but when we have to do that, the idea is for their good, that they would turn back to God, that they would continue to mature. When I discipline my girls, it's not because I get a satisfaction out of punishing them for having done something wrong. No parent really ought to. But rather because even though it's painful, I want them to transform and change, to understand, to become better people, to become more mature, to grow up. And so when you see this passage where people are selling homes and lands and giving, you have to understand that they realize that the people within the church are more important than their resources. If you love someone, your desire is to give to them. If you love someone, that's your desire. But if you love yourself more than someone else, then you don't want to give them. The resources, the time, the money, all of that is kind of like too precious for you to waste on them. And so you have to understand this truth. And at some point, you have to make a decision in your workplace, in your family, within the church. Do I love? Am I going to invest? Am I going to pour out myself? And when you make that decision, you begin to do those things. That's when transformation happens. That's when you care enough, when you have these buckets, you say, okay, I'm going to get involved. I'm going to do what I need to make this work and be a better place. See, so many of us, even at work, at church, even in our families, we're non-committal. We're non-committal. We just say, okay, I'm not going to get involved. I'm just going to do my work, and I'm going to go home. I'm just going to come to church and worship and do these things, and then I'm going to go home. At schools, even in our families, some people are just absent. They'll be there at the family events, but they're not going to get involved and get their hands dirty. They're not going to do things. Most of us, we know that we have to be involved. We have to be there. You know, if my mom was ill, then I would have to either go up there or bring her down or something, because that's part of my relationship with her. She's more important than some of those things that I'm doing right now. When she has the need, then I need to drop what I'm doing to go and do that. Same thing with my kids. Same thing with my family and friends, my loved ones. But it's also be true to a certain extent with those that you work with, those that you are in community with, and especially those that you're in church relationship with. See, the early church understood this. They said, we are going to be invested in one another because I care about you, and I'm going to pour out into you, and I'm going to invest into you. This is something that's really important for us to understand. And Barnabas was one of those people. A lot of people gave up their homes and their houses and property and gave it to the church. But Barnabas, when he did it Not because other people were doing it. There's an example in Acts 4 where this couple said, hey, everybody else is doing it. Let's also, get the credit. And let's also get, the applause. And let's do it too. No. Barnabas did it because he really cared about people. And that's what we have to understand. And later on in Acts chapter 9, when you begin to look, you find that there's some other characteristics that he had that we would do well to emulate if we are to build up within the church, if we are to encourage. And not only within the church, but maybe every area where we have relationships. In Acts chapter 9, there's a very interesting kind of story because there's a man named Saul who's going around persecuting the early church, saying, you guys are heretics and you're taking away from the Jewish tradition. And so I'm going to put you in jail. I'm going to punish you. I'm going to do everything possible to tear you guys down, the early church down. But then he meets Jesus on the road to Damascus and he gets transformed. But everybody's afraid of Saul. They don't want to bring him into the church because he's saying, wait a minute, this guy was around trying to, kill all the disciples. And so when he eventually ends up back in Jerusalem, nobody is greeting him. Nobody's welcoming him. They're all thinking it's a trap. And when he, talking about Saul, had come to Jerusalem, he attempted to join the disciples. He attempted to join the church. He attempted to meet with the apostles and the leadership. But it says, and they were all afraid of him, for they did not believe that he was a disciple. They didn't believe that he had been transformed. But what we find in verse 27 is, but Barnabas took Saul and brought him to the apostles. I see a few things that I want to point out to you about Barnabas. Not only did he understand that people were more important, that he gave and he was generous, but he was someone who believed in the power of transformation. Within the church, you have to believe, and here's the amazing thing that I love about the church. You have hope that people can become radically transformed and different. Over the years, I've seen this happen. And sometimes it takes a long period of time. Sometimes it doesn't take quite as long. But Barnabas was one of those people that believed that Christ, that God, could do amazing things through anyone. Through anyone. And this is one of the unique things about the church that we must understand and that we must have. We need to have an attitude, a heart of hope. A heart that has faith in the transforming power of God. This is why I love the fact that, as a Christian, as a Christian single dad, I'm able to look at my girls, not with just the eyes of a loving parent, but with the eyes knowing that God is who I'm looking towards to help me raise my girls. Because without that, how can I have hope? I can only say, this is how much I've done, God. This is how much time I've spent. Here's how good a parent I've been. And if all I can expect is what I poured in, then I'm kind of scared. But if I can believe and hope that my prayers will be heard, that God will do above and beyond, way more than what I could do as a dad, what I can do with my limited resources, talent, and ability, man, I have hope. I have hope and expectation that God will do amazing things through my daughter. But then I can also turn that upon the whole church. When I look at you guys, I no longer look at you with the eyes of just human potential, what abilities that you have, how smart you are, how gifted you are. But I look way beyond that and say, I don't know how, but God is able to do way, way, way more than I can even begin to imagine or conceive. In and through you, if you would surrender yourself to God. And that's what I'm going to believe, and that's what I know Christ can. Environment and attitude that transforms the church into being. It becomes an incubator of amazing potential. Because that's why the Bible says, Paul later says, the one that nobody wanted to bring into the church, I can do all things through him who strengthens me. And I've been guilty of this. Sometimes I look at certain leaders within the church or certain church members and I get discouraged. I go, man, this guy's never going to change. And the church is always going to be stuck here. And they just don't get it. And I can almost be at the point of despair or giving up. But rather, I'm reminded at those moments, yes, with man it is impossible. But God, it's possible. And then I'm renewed and I can continue to work and continue to serve and continue to pour out my life knowing it's not in vain. The beauty of it is that we never give up. And what we do and what we pour out is never in vain. Can you imagine if you gave a bunch of money to the church, or you gave your time, or you devoted yourself, and ultimately at the end of it you felt like it was all mismanaged, or the church wasted it? Well, you know what I'm going to tell you? Maybe in human perspective that'll be true, but God will say, hey, don't worry about it. You poured out, you gave in faith, you did the best you could with your time, your resources, your talents, and I'm going to make that fruitful and effective. Doesn't mean that God's not going to hold us to how smart or how effective or how well we manage His resources. We should. But He's also going to see how much faith we had in doing so. And if you continue on, what you find is not only does Barnabas take Saul and see the potential in him to become the Apostle Paul, who ends up writing more than a third of the New Testament, but he also is the one that says, look, I talked with him, and now he brings him and introduces him to the apostles. And not only that, he is an intercessor. He is a defendant for him. And he says, look, God has spoken to him. He's transformed. And he brings them and he defends him before the apostles. He's not only someone who has hope, but he also initiates and he also intercedes. And let me tell you why those are so important. If we're going to be a right member of the church, and if we're going to be a right member of any organization, and we're going to be a person that does not add fuel to the fire, but adds water, then we have to be two things. Number one, we have to be proactive and initiate in terms of building relationships with other people. We can't say, that guy, he's just way out there, forget it, I'm just going to write him off. No, we need to be the one that continually serves, that continually reaches out, that continually connects, that continually serves other people. We need to be the one that initiates. And not only that, we also have to be the one that proactively intercedes and tries to make situations and circumstances better. We need to be ones that reconcile people at work. Going, those people having a hard time, well, it's none of my business. No, it's not true. Especially within the church. It's true within the work. If some people are really having problems and stressed out, if some two key folks, whether they're higher or lower in leadership, are really fighting or having a squabble, it affects the whole morale of the workplace. Same thing within the church. The church, the Bible literally says, Paul literally says, that if you are within the church, you can't say someone else's problem is their problem. We had dinner with the couples this past week, and one of the things that I wanted to convey to them, I don't know if I did a good job, but what I said was, you know what, as couples, I want you to know each other, because how well other couples do within the family literally affects you, whether you know it, whether you know them well or not. And people are like, maybe, but here, let me explain why. If we say, I'm going to be involved in your business, I'm going to care about you in a good way, not in a gossiping way, not in a talk behind your back kind of way. But if I say, you know what, I want you to have the best marriage possible. I want all the couples to have the best marriage as possible. I want them to be good husbands and good wives. I want us to challenge one another, to be good moms and dads, to be, better sons and daughters. I want us to challenge one another. Doesn't mean that instantly we're going to get better, but if we have that kind of mentality and we say, we're going to ask one another questions, we're going to be involved in each other's businesses, we're going to care enough to not let you just slide. If I see something going on in your life that's not right, for me to be able to come and talk to you, I'm not going to judge you or be legalistic, but I'm going to say, hey, I've been seeing this. What's going on? How can I help you? Are you guys struggling? What's going on? What's going on with your children? What's going on with your marriage? What's going on? I'm not saying be busybodies, but to care about one another to do that. And the reason why is when we do that, then they're going to speak into our lives, and we're going to all challenge one another to be better. What I find so many times in workplaces, even families, and within the church, is that we're all like, well, that's their business. And I guess I'm not going to get involved. And then that family goes through things, they walk by it themselves, and maybe they don't overcome it, and then they end up having a fractured marriage, and eventually what's going to happen is what? They're going to leave the church and maybe get divorced or the family's going to have a meltdown. And I'm not just trying to put it on all of us to be busybodies, but when we hear, when we see, when we have a chance to talk and interact, we need to do that. But we also need to learn to open up one to another. And I'll be honest, I sometimes see these things, and it takes me a while, even as the pastor, to build up the courage, to build up the resolve to go and talk with people about things. Because there's a fine line between pushing and judging and being harsh to someone and really caring so much about them that you're saying, hey. And sometimes it may come out like, I don't see you at church. But the point we're trying to make is not, why aren't you at church? But what's going on in your relationship? How are you doing spiritually? How are you doing relationally? How are you doing in your relationship with your spouse, with your children? I'm really concerned for your well-being. That's really what it's about. And that's what we're trying to get to. You see, Barnabas was one of those people, maybe by nature of his character and his personality, it was more easy for him, but everybody recognized him. Even though his name was Joseph, everybody around him always felt encouraged. They felt like he asked deep questions he was really concerned about them, their well-being, not only physically and materially, but also spiritually, emotionally, relationally. And so they gave him a nickname. Man, you're just such an encouragement. We're going to call you Barnabas. Bar meaning son of. Nabas meaning encouragement. You're the son of encouragement. And that was his nickname, and everybody recognized that about him. You know what? This is what needs to be true of us, all of us. I think if we learn these things, it will make our marriages, it'll make our families, our workplaces, our friendships, all of our relationships, and especially the church, stronger and better. The funny thing is I think all of us are hungry for deeper, more meaningful relationships. I'm going to tell you, deeper, more meaningful relationships, you know what it means? It means that it's messier, but ultimately it's better. Okay? Any relationship that you have that's close, it's messy. My girls and my relationship, it's messy. Why? Because I see things and we know things about one another. We see the good and the bad. But because we see all those things, if we set our minds for the good of one another, to intentionally build up and encourage one another, what happens is a depth of relationship and an encouragement and the joy that you cannot have otherwise. It requires effort, it requires work, but can you imagine if everybody begins to come on that boat? In your family, in your workplaces, in your church. And so if each one of us had this mentality, I am going to do all that I can to bless, to encourage, to help other people around me. If we all do that, how encouraged we truly will be. I want to encourage all of you. I'm not always able to do it. This is not something that comes natural to me. I'm preaching to myself as much as I am to you. Because it's easier for me to just deal with myself, to just deal with my girls, and to deal with the people I have to deal with, and to say hi to you, and be gracious to you, and greet you once a week. And that's why I have to intentionally set up things like men's discipleship, and set up intentional things like these dinners and whatnot, and Bible studies. Why? Because it doesn't come naturally to me. It doesn't just flow out of my words. That's why we need to intentionally decide that this is a priority and make a commitment. Some of you guys are still there, and you know this is true. But it's not that much harder. You just take the relationships you're already in and begin to move in this direction with them. You begin to take the friends and the people you already know within the church, within your workplaces, within your families, and intentionally say, God, help me to bless these people. Help me to seek their best good. And when we begin to do this, and it begins to spread, that's what I believe is when revival, when amazing transformation begins to happen. Let's not forget how important people are. Let us not lose sight of that. And as we do that, may we be a church, a community, individuals who build up the most important thing. People who are made in the image of Christ. Let's pray together this morning.